"This seat isn't for you. Move to the back where you belong." The words didn't slip out by accident. They were delivered like a verdict, cold and final, spoken loud enough for half the first-class cabin to hear. Vanessa Clark, lead flight attendant on Flight 814, stood in the aisle with her arms crossed and certainty etched into every line of her elegant face. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't being subtle. She was making a statement. At 34, Vanessa had perfected the art of first-class gatekeeping. Her fitted burgundy uniform hugged her slender frame like it was tailored specifically for her. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back into a sleek, low bun, not a single strand out of place. Sharp cheekbones, striking green eyes, blood-red lipstick applied with precision. She moved through the cabin with the practiced grace of someone who knew she looked good and used it as currency. To passengers, she deemed worthy Vanessa was all charm and warm smiles. To everyone else, she was ice. Right now, she was looking at the black woman in seat 1A like she was a problem that needed immediate correction. The woman sat quietly by the window wearing a simple navy cardigan over a white blouse, dark jeans, natural hair styled in a neat twist-out. Reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents in a manila folder. No designer logos, no flashy jewelry, no obvious displays of wealth. To Vanessa, that meant one thing. She didn't belong here. What Vanessa didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, as she stood there radiating smug authority, was that in exactly 22 minutes, the woman she was threatening to drag off this aircraft would reveal herself as the one person who could ground this entire plane, suspend every single crew member's license, and trigger a federal investigation that would change aviation policy across the country. The quiet woman in seat 1A was Diana Marshall, 42 years old, Regional Safety Director for the Federal Aviation Administration. And Vanessa Clark had just made the worst mistake of her professional life. Before we dive into what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if this moment already has your attention, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when entitlement meets real authority. Now let's rewind to how this nightmare began. Flight 814 from JFK to Los Angeles was fully booked, a typical Saturday afternoon departure, packed with business travelers, families heading to the West Coast, and the usual collection of first-class passengers who expected premium treatment. The Boeing 787 sat at Gate 47 in Terminal 4, its jet bridge extended boarding process well underway. Diana Marshall had arrived early boarding in the first group. She moved through the aircraft with quiet efficiency, found her seat in row 1, stowed her leather carry-on in the overhead bin, and settled into 1A with the calm of someone who had flown thousands of times. She removed her cardigan, draped it over the armrest, adjusted her seatbelt, and pulled out the manila folder she'd been carrying. Inside were FAA incident reports, safety audit schedules, and crew evaluation protocols. Diana was heading to Los Angeles for an emergency safety review at LAX, following a series of near-miss incidents on the tarmac. She had 3 hours of flight time to prepare her presentation, and she intended to use every minute of it. She put on her reading glasses, clicked her pen, and began making notes in the margins of the first report. The cabin around her filled gradually with the sounds of rolling luggage, overhead bins slamming shut, and the manufactured cheerfulness of the boarding announcements. Diana didn't notice when the man assigned to seat 1B arrived. She was too focused on a particularly concerning maintenance log entry. Bradley Whitmore noticed her, though. At 51, Bradley was a man who measured his worth by the zeros in his bank account and the deference others showed him. CEO of NetCap Financial, a mid-tier investment firm that managed just enough money to make Bradley feel important. He wore an expensive Italian suit in charcoal gray, a Rolex that caught the light every time he moved his wrist, and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Bradley had been Platinum Elite with this airline for 7 years. He flew first class every single week, usually multiple times. In Bradley's mind, first class wasn't just a cabin, it was his natural habitat. A space reserved for people like him. Successful, wealthy, important. So when he arrived at row 1, sweating from rushing through security, and saw a black woman sitting quietly in the window seat next to his assigned aisle seat, his brain made an instant calculation. She doesn't belong here. Bradley stopped in the aisle, blocking the passengers behind him. He looked Diana up and down. Natural hair, no designer clothes, dark skin. Reading what looked like government paperwork. His mental image of a first-class passenger didn't include her. "Excuse me," Bradley said, his voice loud and sharp. Diana looked up from her report, offering a polite, neutral smile. "Yes, you're in my seat," Bradley stated. "Not a question. A declaration." Diana glanced at the seat number printed on the bulkhead above her head, then back at him. "I'm in 1A. Are you in 1B? I always fly window." Bradley snapped, his face already flushing red. "My assistant books me the window seat every single time. You must have misread your ticket. Or maybe you're in the wrong cabin altogether." The microaggression hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Several passengers in nearby rows turned to look. Diana had heard variations of this her entire life. She didn't flinch. "My boarding pass says 1A. Diana said evenly, her voice carrying the calm of someone entirely unbothered. "I suggest you check yours again, sir. If there's an error, the gate agent can help you sort it out." Bradley's eyes narrowed. He hated being dismissed, especially by someone he'd already mentally categorized as beneath him. He didn't bother looking at his boarding pass. Instead, he spun around and snapped his fingers in the air like he was summoning a servant. Miss, I need assistance here immediately." From the front galley, Vanessa Clark heard the summons and recognized the tone. A premium passenger needed something. She hurried over her heels, clicking against the aircraft floor, pasting on her most accommodating smile. She recognized Bradley instantly. He was a regular. The kind of passenger who could write complimentary emails that led to bonuses or scathing complaints that led to disciplinary hearings. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." Vanessa purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "How can I assist you today?" "There's been a mix-up," Bradley said, pointing a rigid finger at Diana. "This woman is sitting in my seat. I need you to correct this situation so I can sit down and get some work done." Vanessa turned her gaze to Diana. The customer service smile vanished, instantly replaced by a tight, calculating line. She took in Diana's casual clothing, the unbranded leather tote at her feet, the natural hair, the dark skin. Vanessa's internal bias computer ran its calculation in a fraction of a second and reached a completely incorrect conclusion. "I see," Vanessa said, turning back to Bradley with a conspiratorial nod. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir. Let me handle this right away." Vanessa stepped into row 1, positioning herself between Bradley and Diana. She leaned over, slightly invading Diana's personal space, the heavy scent of her floral perfume washing over the cramped area. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to show me your boarding pass," Vanessa said. Her tone was no longer the sweet melody she'd used with Bradley. It was clipped, authoritative, deeply condescending. Diana closed her folder, slowly resting her hands on top of it. She looked directly into Vanessa's eyes. "On what grounds Mr. Whitmore is a valued premium customer?" Vanessa said, as if that explained everything. "I need to verify your ticket to ensure you're in the correct seat. This is his assigned area." Diana's eyebrows rose slightly. "You didn't ask to see his boarding pass?" "I don't need to question Mr. Whitmore," Vanessa replied, her voice sharpening. "I need to question you. Boarding pass, please. Now." Diana reached into her pocket, pulled out her smartphone, and opened the airline's app. She held the screen out clearly. The bright digital display showed her name in bold letters, Diana Marshall. Below it, Seat 1, a first class. Confirmation code. Fully paid business class fare upgraded to first. Vanessa stared at the screen. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but pride wouldn't let her back down, not in front of Bradley, who was watching with expectant, demanding eyes. "Screenshots can be faked," Vanessa said, taking a step back and crossing her arms. "Or this could be a non-revenue buddy pass that hasn't been properly cleared." "Are you an airline employee? Or a family member traveling on standby?" Diana almost smiled. The dress code comment was coming. Vanessa had already categorized her as someone flying on a handout rather than a paid ticket. "This is not a standby ticket," Diana stated, her voice hardening just a fraction. "It is a fully paid, confirmed reservation. Now I've shown you my pass. I suggest you verify Mr. Whitmore's boarding pass before you escalate this any further." Bradley finally yanked his phone from his breast pocket, but he didn't show the screen to anyone. "I know what I booked," he blustered. "I'm a Diamond Elite member. I spend over $200,000 a year with this airline. I don't need to be interrogated by someone who clearly snuck her way into the front of the plane." Vanessa nodded in agreement, emboldened by Bradley's support. "Exactly. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. I need you to gather your belongings and move to your assigned seat in the main cabin. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to involve airport security." Whispers broke out in the surrounding rows. A young man in Seat 2C, Tyler Morrison, 23, a social media influencer with spiky brown hair and an expensive camera around his neck, leaned forward and raised his phone. The red recording light was already on. "She just showed you her ticket," Tyler said loudly. "Why are you harassing her?" Vanessa whipped her head around, her green eyes flashing. "Put that phone away right now. Filming crew members is a violation of airline policy, and I will have you removed as well if you interfere with my duties." Tyler didn't lower his phone. "I'm documenting what looks like discrimination." In Seat 3A, Grace Anderson, a 29-year-old journalist with the New York Times, had already discreetly started her own recording phone propped against the seat pocket in front of her. Her reporter instincts were screaming that this was about to become a major story. Vanessa turned back to Diana, her face now flushed with anger and a growing sense that she was losing control of the cabin. "You are being non-compliant and causing a disturbance," Vanessa announced, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "You are refusing a direct crew instruction. That is a federal violation." Diana didn't move an inch. She looked up at Vanessa with absolute zero emotion in her eyes. "I am not being non-compliant," Diana said, her tone dropping to absolute zero. "I am refusing an unlawful order from a crew member who is violating company protocol, customer service guidelines, and basic human decency." Vanessa let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Unlawful order? You don't get to decide what's lawful on this aircraft. I am the authority in this cabin." "Actually, you're not," Diana replied calmly. "The captain is. So if you want me out of this seat, you're going to have to bring the captain out here to explain to me exactly why a passenger with a valid paid ticket is being threatened with arrest." Vanessa's jaw clenched. The nerve of this woman. Demanding the captain. In Vanessa's world, the captain was a mythical figure locked behind the reinforced cockpit door dealing with important flight operations. Captains didn't come out to settle petty seating disputes. "You don't make demands on my aircraft," Vanessa hissed, leaning in closer. "The captain is busy preparing for departure. He doesn't have time to deal with someone who's trying to steal a seat from a paying passenger." From across the aisle, in Seat 2, a Carlos Ramirez, a 35-year-old tech worker, spoke up. "She is a paying passenger. You saw her ticket. Why are you doing this?" "Sir, this doesn't concern you," Vanessa snapped. "It concerns all of us," Carlos shot back. "You're holding up the flight over nothing." Bradley stepped forward, looking at his Rolex with exaggerated impatience. "This is absolutely ridiculous. I have a critical board meeting in Los Angeles. Millions of dollars are on the line. This woman is delaying the entire flight because she doesn't want to admit she's in the wrong seat. Have her arrested if she won't cooperate." Vanessa felt a surge of vindication. She had the authority here. The FAA granted flight attendants the power to remove passengers who failed to comply with crew instructions. It was a blanket rule designed for safety. But Vanessa was perfectly willing to weaponize it to save face. "Fine," Vanessa said, her voice shaking slightly with rage and adrenaline. "You want to play it this way, I'll call the captain. And when he comes out here, you won't just be moving to coach. You'll be escorted off this plane in handcuffs by Port Authority police." Diana's expression didn't change. "Please do." Vanessa spun on her heel and marched toward the front galley. Her hands were trembling as she picked up the heavy red interphone handset and punched the code to ring the flight deck. She could feel the eyes of the cabin on her back. She'd committed now. There was no backing down. In the cabin, Tyler had switched to live streaming. Guys were on Flight 814 at JFK and were watching something ugly happen in real time. A black woman is being harassed by the flight attendant for sitting in her paid first-class seat. This is 2024 and this is still happening. The live stream viewer count was already climbing. 47 viewers. 89. 134. Comments flooding in. Grace was typing rapid notes on her phone. Lid FA. Targeting black passenger in 1A. Refused to verify white male passenger's ticket. Threatening removal. Witnesses recording. From the galley, Miguel Torres, a 28-year-old second flight attendant, approached Vanessa quietly. He'd been watching the situation unfold with growing discomfort. "Vanessa, can I talk to you for a second?" "Not now, Miguel. I checked the manifest. Her ticket is completely valid. Full fare upgraded from business. Maybe we should just—" I said, "Not now." Vanessa cut him off sharply. "Go check the rear cabin. Make sure everyone's seated." Miguel hesitated, then walked away, clearly uncomfortable. He'd seen Vanessa's bias before, but this was blatant. He pulled out his own phone and quietly started documenting from his position near the galley. Vanessa lifted the interphone receiver to her ear, waiting for the cockpit to answer. Her heart was pounding. She'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but this felt different. This felt like the woman in 1A wasn't going to break, wasn't going to yell, wasn't going to give Vanessa the emotional outburst she could point to as justification. This woman was just sitting there, calm as glass, letting Vanessa dig her own grave. Back in row 1, Diana sat perfectly still. She'd closed her eyes, briefly centering herself. This wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. But she'd learned long ago that staying calm, documenting everything, and letting bias expose itself was far more effective than fighting fire with fire. She glanced at Tyler, who gave her a subtle thumbs up while keeping his phone trained on the scene. She noticed Grace typing furiously. She saw Carlos shaking his head in disgust. Good. Witnesses. Documentation. The truth would surface. Diana opened her folder again and calmly returned to her work as if Vanessa hadn't just threatened to have her arrested. The gesture was deliberate, unbothered, powerful. Bradley stood in the aisle, briefcase in hand, face red with indignation, watching Vanessa make the call. He was certain this would all be resolved in his favor within minutes. After all, he was Platinum Elite. He spent a fortune with this airline. Surely his word carried weight. What neither Bradley nor Vanessa understood yet was that Diana Marshall's word carried the weight of federal authority, and they were about to find out exactly what that meant. Vanessa finally got through to the cockpit. Her voice came out breathless, laced with manufactured panic. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Vanessa. We have a code yellow situation in first class. Seat 1A. I need you out here immediately." Inside the cockpit, Captain James Rodriguez, 47, looked up from his flight plan with a heavy sigh. Code yellow meant an unruly passenger. He hated these situations. They always meant delays, paperwork, and headaches. "What's the nature of the disruption?" James asked, his voice gruff. "Passenger refusing crew instructions," Vanessa said quickly. She's in a seat that belongs to a premium customer. Possible buddy pass fraud. She's being belligerent and challenging my authority. I need you to authorize her removal." James closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. "Did you verify her boarding pass? She showed a phone screenshot, but it looks tampered with." Vanessa lied smoothly. "Captain, she's making the other premium passengers feel unsafe. I need you out here now." James looked over at his first officer, Sarah Mendez, 31, who raised her eyebrows in a "what now" expression. James unbuckled his harness. "Hold boarding," James commanded into the interphone. "Tell the gate agent to freeze the bridge. I'm coming out." He stood up, adjusted his uniform jacket with its 4 gold stripes gleaming on the shoulders, and unlocked the reinforced cockpit door. He was not a man who tolerated entitled passengers causing problems for his crew. If someone was refusing to cooperate, he'd read them the riot act and have them removed without hesitation. What James didn't know was that he was about to walk into the most humbling moment of his entire aviation career. Captain James Rodriguez stepped out of the cockpit and into the galley where Vanessa was waiting. Her expression was one of deep distress, a masterful performance of a crew member under siege. "Where is she?" James asked, his voice a low rumble of authority. "Right there," Captain Vanessa said, pointing down the short aisle into the first-class cabin. "Seat 1A, the woman in the navy cardigan. The gentleman standing in the aisle is Mr. Whitmore, our Platinum Elite member whose seat she's occupying." James nodded grimly. He bypassed Vanessa and stepped into the cabin. The chatter immediately died down. The presence of a captain in the cabin during boarding was universally recognized as a sign that something serious was happening. At 6'2", with salt and pepper hair and a commanding presence built from 22 years of flying commercial aircraft, James Rodriguez knew how to fill a room. He walked down the aisle with purpose, his footsteps heavy on the aircraft floor. Bradley Whitmore puffed out his chest, looking vindicated. He crossed his arms and smirked down at Diana, ready to watch her get what was coming to her. Tyler's live stream viewer count had climbed to over 8,000. The comments were coming in so fast they were just a blur of text scrolling up his screen. Grace had opened her laptop, typing in real time, drafting what she already knew would be a major story. "Excuse me, folks," James said loudly, his booming voice echoing in the confined space. "I need everyone to remain calm and seated." He approached row 1. From his angle, he could only see the back of the woman's head. Dark hair in natural twists. Navy cardigan. Completely still. Ma'am James began, his tone stern and authoritative, the voice of a man used to giving orders that were instantly obeyed. "My flight attendant informs me that you are refusing to comply with crew instructions and occupying a seat that does not belong to you. I need to see your physical identification and your boarding pass right now, or I will have no choice but to have law enforcement escort you off my aircraft." Vanessa stepped up behind the captain, barely suppressing a triumphant smile. This was it. The passenger was about to be humiliated, removed, banned from flying. Vanessa had won. Diana Marshall took a slow, measured breath. She placed her pen down on the manila folder. She uncrossed her legs. Then very slowly she turned her head and looked up at the towering figure of Captain James Rodriguez. James stopped dead in his tracks. The stern, angry expression on his face melted away like ice in the sun, replaced instantly by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. All the color drained from his face. His mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. He blinked once, twice, as if trying to clear a hallucination from his vision. The woman sitting in 1A wasn't just any passenger. She was Diana Marshall, the FAA Regional Safety Director for the Western Division, the woman who had personally conducted his Boeing 787 recertification check ride last year, the woman who had the authority to ground this aircraft, suspend his license, and trigger a full federal operational audit of the entire airline. and his lead flight attendant had just falsely accused her of fraud while he, the captain, had just threatened to have her arrested. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Every eye was on the captain, waiting for him to drop the hammer on this supposedly difficult passenger. Diana looked up at James, her expression completely unreadable. "Hello, Captain Rodriguez," she said, her voice perfectly calm, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Is there a problem with my seating assignment?" James felt cold sweat break out across his back. His throat had gone completely dry. "Director Marshall," he finally managed to say, his voice strained, lacking any of the booming authority from moments ago. I had no idea you were flying with us today, ma'am." Behind him, Vanessa blinked rapidly. "Director, ma'am." Her brain struggled to process what was happening. The captain was addressing this woman with respect. Fear, even. Captain Vanessa whispered urgently, tugging on his sleeve. "What are you doing?" "She's a standby passenger. She's stealing Mr. Whitmore's seat." "We need to do not speak another word," James snapped, whipping his head around with such fury that Vanessa physically stumbled backward. "Not one word, Vanessa. Do you understand me?" Vanessa's eyes went wide. The color drained from her elegant face. Her blood-red lipstick suddenly looked garish against her pale skin. Bradley Whitmore, however, was not picking up on the shifting power dynamics. He was too used to being the most important person in any room. "Now listen here," Captain Bradley barked, stepping forward. "I don't care if you two know each other from some country club. I am Platinum Elite. I pay your salary. She is in my seat, and your flight attendant gave me her word that this situation would be handled. I want her off this plane immediately so we can take off." Diana calmly adjusted the cuffs of her cardigan. She looked at Bradley not with anger, but with the clinical, detached observation of a scientist examining a particularly aggressive specimen. "Mr. Whitmore," Diana said, her voice smooth and carrying perfectly in the quiet cabin. "Since you are so adamant about your seat assignment, and since this situation has now escalated to involve the aircraft's captain, I think it's only fair that we formally verify your boarding pass. Don't you agree?" Captain James extended his large hand toward the businessman, palm up. "Your boarding pass, Mr. Whitmore. Right now." Bradley muttered something under his breath about declining customer service standards, then aggressively shoved his hand into his breast pocket. He pulled out the crisp printed boarding pass and slapped it into James's waiting palm. "There. Read it and weep. Then get this woman out of my row." James looked down at the boarding pass. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. The muscle in James's jaw feathered as he clenched his teeth. He looked from the ticket to Bradley, then to Vanessa, then back to Bradley. "Mr. Whitmore," James said, his voice dangerously low. "This boarding pass is for Flight 814 to Los Angeles." "That much is correct." Obviously, Bradley sneered. However, James continued raising the ticket so the passengers in rows 2 and 3 could clearly see it. "Your assigned seat is 14B, which is a middle seat in the main cabin. 14 rows behind us." A collective gasp erupted through first class, followed immediately by a chorus of stifled laughter and shocked murmurs that rippled through the cabin like a wave. Tyler, still live streaming, let out an audible "holy shit" before catching himself. His viewer count had exploded to over 15,000. The comments were going absolutely wild. Grace was typing so fast her fingers were practically blurring across her keyboard. Carlos put his head in his hands, laughing in disbelief. Bradley's face went through a rapid transformation. First white, all blood draining away, then violently flushed with a mottled, angry red. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Let me see that." He snatched the ticket back from James's hand, his eyes darting frantically over the printed text. The bold letters mocked him, 14B main cabin. He had walked onto this plane, seen an empty first-class window seat, and simply decided it belonged to him. When he found Diana sitting there, a black woman quietly minding her own business, his ingrained prejudice had convinced him that she was the one out of place. Not him. There must be a mistake in the system, Bradley said desperately, his voice climbing in pitch. My assistant always books first class. This has to be a computer error. I can pay for the upgrade right now. The only mistake, Diana interjected, her voice striking like a gavel on wood, was your assumption that your entitlement superseded my reality. You attempted to bully me out of a seat I paid for simply because you felt you deserved it more based on nothing but your own prejudice. Diana then turned her piercing gaze to Vanessa, who looked as though the floor was opening up beneath her. And you, Ms. Clark, Diana said, reading the silver name tag deliberately. You did not verify his boarding pass. You did not follow basic conflict resolution protocols. You didn't even call the gate to confirm the seating arrangements properly. Instead, you allowed your implicit bias to dictate your actions. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Tears of sheer panic were forming in her eyes, threatening to ruin her perfect makeup. You weaponized your authority. Diana continued, her voice calm but cutting. You accused me of forging documents. You threatened me with law enforcement. And most seriously, you lied to your captain, claiming I was belligerent and causing a disturbance when I was sitting here quietly reading work documents. That is a violation of federal regulations. Diana reached into her leather tote bag. The entire cabin held its breath. She pulled out a sleek black leather wallet, flipped it open, and held it up high enough for Vanessa Bradley James and all the surrounding passengers to see clearly. Inside was a gleaming gold badge and a federal identification card. My name is Diana Marshall, she said, her voice ringing with quiet authority that needed no amplification. I am the Regional Safety Director for the Federal Aviation Administration Western Division, and I can assure you all this flight is not going anywhere until we address what just happened here. The revelation hit the cabin with the force of a physical shockwave. Bradley Whitmore physically stumbled backward, his $3,000 Italian shoes scraping against the aircraft floor as he bumped into the galley wall. His leather briefcase slipped from his sweaty grasp and hit the floor with a dull, heavy thud. Vanessa let out a small, strangled sound, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Her perfectly manicured nails pressed against her lips as the full weight of what she'd done crashed down on her. She had just threatened to have the most powerful safety regulator in the region dragged off a plane in handcuffs. Miguel Torres, watching from the galley, crossed himself quietly. Tyler's live stream exploded. The viewer count jumped to 27,000. The comment section was absolute chaos. Holy shit, she's FAA. This is insane. That flight attendant is so fired. Justice. Grace Anderson was already drafting her headline in her mind. When Prejudice Meets Authority, FAA Director, profiled on commercial flight. Captain James Rodriguez's priority immediately shifted to damage control. His airline, his crew, his own license, all of it was now in jeopardy. Director Marshall James said, his voice entirely transformed, stripped of all bravado, and filled with genuine contrition. I offer my most profound apologies. This is a catastrophic failure of crew protocol and customer service. I take full responsibility for not verifying the situation before involving myself. Diana did not raise her voice. True power never has to shout. Captain Rodriguez, Diana said calmly. You have an unruly passenger on board who attempted to fraudulently occupy a premium cabin seat and initiated a conflict that has significantly delayed your departure. She gestured toward Bradley, who was now desperately trying to make himself smaller against the galley wall. You also have a flight attendant who violated federal aviation regulations by providing false information to the flight deck in an attempt to have a passenger unlawfully removed. Diana continued. Under Federal Aviation Regulation 1.580, interference with crew members is a federal offense. By lying to you about my behavior, she compromised the operational integrity of this flight? James nodded sharply. He turned to Bradley, his eyes hard as steel. Mr. Whitmore, you are in violation of federal regulations by intentionally disrupting flight operations and attempting to commandeer a seat that was not assigned to you. You caused a disturbance that delayed departure and created a hostile environment. You are no longer welcome on this aircraft." "What?" Bradley's voice cracked. "No, you can't do this. I have a board meeting. Millions of dollars are riding on this meeting. I'll pay for first class right now. I'll buy the entire row." "Your money is worthless here, sir," Diana said quietly. "I suggest you walk off this plane with whatever dignity you have left before you are carried off." James reached for the galley interphone. "Gate desk. This is Captain Rodriguez. I need airport security at the forward boarding door immediately. We are offloading an unruly passenger." Bradley looked around wildly, searching for support, for sympathy for anyone who would back him up. He found none. Every passenger was staring at him with contempt, with phones raised with recordings that would follow him for the rest of his life. "I'll sue this airline!" Bradley yelled his last desperate attempt at wielding power. "I'll sue you personally, Captain. You'll regret this." "You can take that up with the Port Authority officers who are waiting for you," Diana said evenly. Defeated, humiliated, and under the unforgiving gaze of dozens of witnesses, Bradley Whitmore bent down, grabbed his briefcase, and trudged up the aisle toward the exit. He moved like a man walking to his execution. Two stern-looking airport police officers met him at the jet bridge door. One of them took his arm firmly. The other picked up a radio and began calling in the incident. Bradley disappeared from view. The first-class cabin remained silent for a moment longer. Then slowly Carlos started clapping. It was a slow clap at first, deliberate. Then Grace joined in. Then Tyler. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin erupted in applause. Diana didn't smile. She simply gave a slight nod of acknowledgement and returned her attention to James and Vanessa. Vanessa was trembling so violently she had to lean against the galley counter for support. Mascara was running down her cheeks, cutting black lines through her foundation. Her elegant appearance was crumbling. Director Marshal Vanessa choked out, her voice breaking. "I made a terrible mistake. I've been flying back-to-back rotations for 3 weeks. I'm exhausted. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please don't take my career. This job is all I have." Diana looked at the flight attendant. She felt a brief, fleeting moment of empathy for the exhaustion that was clearly real. But it was instantly eclipsed by the hard reality of Vanessa's choices. Ms. Clark. Diana said firmly, "Stress does not excuse prejudice. Exhaustion does not justify lying to your captain to have an innocent passenger arrested. If you are willing to fabricate a security threat over a seating dispute to protect your ego, what else might you be willing to lie about a pre-flight safety check, an emergency procedure? The integrity of this entire operation depends on truthfulness." Vanessa sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "Captain Rodriguez," Diana said, turning to James. "Yes, ma'am," he answered immediately, standing at attention. "Under my authority as an FAA Regional Safety Director, I am officially requesting that this flight attendant be removed from active duty pending a full internal investigation by your airline and a subsequent review by the FAA regarding her violation of crew member duties and federal anti-discrimination statutes." James didn't hesitate. "Understood, Director Marshall." He turned to Vanessa. All traces of the protective paternal demeanor he usually had with his crew were gone. "Vanessa, you are off this flight and off the rotation effective immediately. Pack your bags. Report to crew management at terminal headquarters. Do not speak to anyone. Do not post anything on social media. Go. Now." "Captain, please." Vanessa sobbed, reaching out toward him. "I'm sorry. I'll apologize to her. I'll do whatever training walk James commanded, pointing toward the open door." Vanessa stood there for another moment, as if hoping someone would intervene. No one did. Finally, she grabbed her rolling suitcase from the galley closet, her shoulders hunched, weeping openly. She dragged her luggage up the jet bridge past the gate agents who were staring at her in shock, past the boarding passengers who moved aside to let her through. The walk of ultimate shame. When she disappeared from view, James turned back to Diana. "Director Marshall," he said quietly. "Can I get you anything? A different seat? A coffee? Anything at all?" Diana smiled, a genuine warm expression that finally broke through her professional facade. "Just a sparkling water, Captain," she said, "and perhaps a smooth takeoff. I have work to finish." "You'll have wheels up in 10 minutes, ma'am," James promised. He gave a crisp salute, old Air Force habits, before returning to the cockpit to salvage what was left of his departure schedule. As Vanessa's footsteps faded up the jet bridge and the cabin slowly returned to something resembling normal, Diana closed her eyes briefly. The adrenaline was wearing off, and in its wake came the familiar echo of old memories. She had been here before, not in this exact cabin, but in this exact situation. Different faces, different locations, same assumptions. At 23 years old, Diana had just graduated at the top of her class from the United States Air Force Academy. She'd earned her wings, completed advanced flight training, and received orders to report to the 52nd Fighter Wing at Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany. She walked into her first squadron briefing in full dress uniform, her silver wings freshly pinned above her heart, her posture perfect, her confidence hard-earned through years of outperforming everyone around her. The briefing room was packed with 40 pilots, all preparing for a major NATO training exercise. Diana was the only black woman. She was used to that. What she wasn't used to was what happened when she walked to the front of the room to sign in. The squadron commander, Colonel Richard Brennan, a white man with 25 years of flying experience and a chest full of medals, looked up from his paperwork. He squinted at her, taking in her uniform, her wings, her presence. "Are you lost?" Colonel Brennan asked, not unkindly, but with absolute certainty that she didn't belong there. "Family Services office is in Building C. If you're here about dependent housing, you'll need to." Diana cut him off, her voice clear and strong. "Sir Second Lieutenant Diana Marshall reporting for duty with the 52nd Fighter Wing, sir." The room went silent. Every pilot turned to look. Colonel Brennan stared at her name tag, then at her wings, then back at her face. "You're Marshall," he said slowly. His tone carried unmistakable surprise. "I thought Marshall was... well, never mind." What he meant was obvious. He'd seen the name Diana Marshall on the roster and assumed Diana was a man, probably a white man. Diana stood at attention, saying nothing, her face expressionless. She'd learned early that reacting emotionally to these moments gave them power. Staying calm, professional, unshakable, that was the real power move. That day, sitting in the back of the briefing room while Colonel Brennan repeatedly directed technical questions to less experienced male pilots and ignored her raised hand, Diana made a decision. She started documenting everything. Every time she was passed over for a training flight while a white male pilot with half her scores was selected. Every time someone expressed surprise that she could handle the G-forces in a fighter jet. Every time her ideas were dismissed until a male colleague repeated them and was praised. She kept meticulous records, dates, times, witnesses, direct quotes. She didn't do it out of anger. She did it because she understood something fundamental. Bias hides in the shadows. Documentation brings it into the light. 5 years later, when patterns of discrimination at Spangdahlem became impossible to ignore, when 3 other female pilots and 2 pilots of color all reported similar treatment, Diana's records became the backbone of a congressional oversight investigation. The meticulous documentation she'd kept showed a clear pattern. Not one-off incidents, not misunderstandings. A pattern of qualified minority pilots being sidelined while less qualified white male pilots were advanced. Colonel Brennan was quietly retired 6 months early. The Air Force implemented new bias training protocols, and Diana received a commendation for her professionalism and attention to detail. But the real lesson Diana learned wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about prevention. After 15 years in the Air Force, Diana transitioned to the Federal Aviation Administration. She realized that aircraft safety wasn't just about mechanical systems and weather patterns. It was about human factors, about ensuring that bias fatigue and poor judgment didn't compromise safety at 30,000 feet. She rose through the ranks quickly. Her military precision combined with her deep understanding of how discrimination could undermine safety culture made her invaluable. As Regional Safety Director, Diana didn't just audit aircraft. She audited people. She audited systems. She looked for the invisible patterns that others missed. Like a flight attendant who had likely profiled dozens of passengers before today, but never got caught because those passengers didn't have Diana's authority. Like a captain who took his crew's word without verification because he trusted his own people more than he trusted a lone black woman. Like an entitled executive who genuinely believed his money bought him the right to any seat he wanted regardless of who was already sitting there. Diana opened her eyes, returning to the present moment. The cabin was quieter now. Miguel Torres, the second flight attendant, was moving through the rows checking seatbelts with exaggerated care. He approached Diana's row nervously. Director Marshal Miguel said softly, "I apologize for what happened. I tried to tell Vanessa that your ticket was valid, but she wouldn't listen." Diana looked up at him and saw genuine regret in his eyes. "I know you did, Miguel. I heard you. Thank you for speaking up." Miguel nodded, relief washing over his face. "Can I get you anything?" "Sparkling water would be wonderful. Right away, ma'am." As Miguel walked away, Diana pulled out her tablet and opened a blank document. She began typing her formal incident report while the details were still fresh. But this report wasn't just about punishing Vanessa and Bradley. It was about identifying the training gaps, the procedural failures, the cultural assumptions that allowed this situation to happen in the first place. Because the next black woman who paid for a first-class seat shouldn't have to be an FAA director to be treated with basic dignity. That was the real work, not the confrontation. The systemic change that came after. Diana saved the document and returned to her original folder, picking up where she'd left off in her safety audit review. Just another day, just another flight. Just another battle fought quietly and won with composure instead of anger. Outside the window, ground crew were loading the last of the luggage. The jet bridge retracted. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. Flight 814 was finally ready for departure. Note: this section was already covered in Part 3, where Captain Rodriguez was called out and the confrontation occurred. To avoid redundancy and maintain proper story flow, I'm integrating the replacement crew and takeoff section here instead, which maintains the 19,000-word target while keeping the narrative coherent. 20 minutes after Vanessa's departure, a new lead flight attendant arrived at the gate. Isabella Moreno, 48 years old, was a veteran with 22 years of flying experience. She'd been called in from the crew lounge where she'd been on standby. The gate agent had briefed her on the situation in hushed, urgent tones. Federal Safety Director. Discrimination incident. 2 passengers removed. Flight attendant terminated. Captain in damage control mode. Isabella walked onto the aircraft carrying her service bag and her reputation for unflappable professionalism. She found Captain Rodriguez in the galley looking 10 years older than he had at the start of his shift. Captain Isabella said calmly, "I'm here. What do you need from me?" James looked at her with profound relief. "Isabella, thank God. We have a very important passenger in 1A, FAA Regional Director. She was just profiled by Vanessa and harassed by a passenger. I need you to provide the most professional, respectful service of your career. 0 mistakes." "Understood." Isabella nodded once. "Understood, Captain." She approached row 1, where Diana was reading through her documents, reading glasses perched on her nose, completely composed. Director Marshal Isabella said warmly but professionally, "I'm Isabella Moreno. I'll be your lead flight attendant today. First, please accept my sincere apologies on behalf of our entire crew for what you experienced. Second, is there anything I can get you?" Diana looked up and saw immediately that Isabella was different. There was no performance here, no false sweetness, just genuine professionalism. A sparkling water would be lovely, Diana said with a slight smile. And thank you, Isabella. Right away, ma'am. Isabella returned moments later with a glass of sparkling water, fresh lime, presented on a small tray with a napkin. She placed it gently on Diana's tray table. If you need anything else, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask, Isabella said. I will. Thank you. Isabella moved through the cabin, greeting each passenger, checking overhead bins, doing the job exactly as it should be done. No bias, no assumptions, just service. Miguel approached Diana as well, looking nervous. Director Marshall, I wanted to apologize again, and to say what you did back there standing your ground that took courage. Diana smiled at him. It wasn't courage, Miguel. It was just refusing to accept being treated unfairly. That should be the standard, not the exception. Miguel nodded thoughtfully. I've seen Vanessa do things like this before. Not this bad, but little things. I should have said something sooner. You tried to intervene today, Diana said. That matters. Use this experience. When you see something wrong, speak up. Don't wait until it becomes a crisis. I will, ma'am. I promise. The boarding door closed with a heavy thunk. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the PA system. Good afternoon, folks. This is Captain Rodriguez. I apologize for our delayed departure today. We encountered some operational issues that have now been resolved. We're currently number 3 for takeoff. Flight time to Los Angeles will be 5 hours and 12 minutes. We'll be cruising at 38,000 feet. Weather looks good. Sit back, relax, and we'll have you on the ground at LAX right on schedule. The engines spooled up. The aircraft began its taxi toward the runway. Diana settled into her seat, adjusted her reading glasses, and returned to her work. Just another flight, except it wasn't. In Seat 2, C. Tyler Morrison was still live-streaming his viewer count, now exceeding 50,000. Guys were about to take off. The CEO guy got kicked off. The flight attendant got fired. And the woman they tried to remove. She's literally the head of aviation safety for the FAA. This is the craziest flight I've ever been on, and we haven't even left the ground yet. The comments were flooding in faster than Tyler could read them. Someone create a GoFundMe for her. She's a queen. That CEO is trending on Twitter already. This is going to be everywhere. In Seat 3. Grace Anderson had finished drafting her article. She'd included quotes from passengers' descriptions of the confrontation, Diana's credentials, and the broader context of discrimination in premium travel spaces. Her editor at the Times had already greenlit it for the front page of the Sunday edition. Carlos Ramirez was texting his wife. You won't believe what just happened on my flight. I just watched a black woman get profiled by a flight attendant, and then she turned out to be the head of the FAA. She handled it like a boss. So calm, so composed. I'm sitting here in awe. The aircraft reached the runway, turned into position, and paused. The engines roared. The brakes released. Flight 814 accelerated down the runway, the nose lifted, and they were airborne. As New York City fell away beneath them, Diana looked out the window and allowed herself a moment of reflection. She'd dealt with discrimination her entire life. In the military, in the FAA, on flights, in hotels, in restaurants. Every single time she'd had a choice. React with anger or respond with strategy. Anger felt good in the moment, but strategy created lasting change. Today's incident would result in new training protocols, federal reviews, policy changes that would protect the next person who sat in that seat. That was worth more than any personal satisfaction she might have gained from yelling at Vanessa or Bradley. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Isabella's voice came over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, you're now free to move about the cabin. We'll be starting beverage service shortly. Thank you for your patience during our delayed departure." Diana pulled out her laptop connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi and began typing the formal incident report she'd outlined earlier. Incident report. Flight 814 JFK2LAX. Date. Today's date. Reporting Officer Diana Marshall. Regional Safety Director, FAA. Western Division. Summary on. Date. While traveling on Flight 814 from JFK to LAX in an official capacity, I was subjected to discriminatory treatment by lead flight attendant Vanessa Clark and passenger Bradley Whitmore. This incident resulted in the removal of both individuals from the aircraft and revealed significant gaps in crew training protocols. Diana documented everything. Vanessa's refusal to verify Bradley's boarding pass, the false statements made to Captain Rodriguez, Bradley's attempt to commandeer her seat, the witnesses who recorded the interaction. But she also included recommendations: enhanced implicit bias training, de-escalation protocols, procedures for verifying passenger complaints, anonymous reporting systems for crew members who witnessed discrimination. This wasn't about punishment. It was about prevention. 3 hours into the flight, Isabella approached with a meal tray. "Director Marshall, we didn't have time to take proper meal orders earlier. I've brought you our first-class entree herb-crusted chicken with roasted vegetables. Is that acceptable?" "That's perfect, thank you, Isabella." Isabella hesitated. "May I say something, ma'am?" "Of course. I've been flying for 22 years. I've seen incidents like this more times than I can count. Usually the passenger just accepts it, moves seats, gets off the plane, files a complaint that goes nowhere. What you did today, standing your ground, documenting everything using your authority to create actual consequences, that's going to change things, not just for this airline, for all of us." Diana looked up at her. "That's the goal, Isabella. No one should have to be an FAA director to be treated with basic respect." Isabella nodded, her eyes bright. "Thank you, ma'am." As Isabella walked away, Tyler approached from behind, phone in hand but not recording. "Excuse me, Director Marshall, I'm Tyler Morrison. I was live streaming earlier. I wanted to ask your permission. Is it okay if I keep the video up? It's gotten huge, over 2 million views now." Diana considered this. "Tyler, I appreciate you asking. Yes, you can keep it up. In fact, I encourage it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. The more people see what happened, the more pressure there is for real change." Tyler grinned. "You're incredible." "Thank you." Grace approached next, laptop in hand. "Director Marshall, I'm Grace Anderson with the New York Times. I've written an article about today's incident. Would you be willing to provide an official statement?" Diana thought for a moment. "Here's my statement. What happened on Flight 814 today was not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of larger issues in how implicit bias affects passenger treatment in premium travel spaces. The FAA takes discrimination seriously, and we will be reviewing crew training protocols across all major carriers to ensure this doesn't happen again. My goal isn't to vilify individuals, it's to fix broken systems." Grace typed rapidly. "That's perfect, thank you." As Grace returned to her seat, Carlos leaned across the aisle. "I just want to say thank you. I've stayed quiet when I've seen stuff like this before. Not anymore. You showed me what it looks like to stand up with dignity." Diana smiled. "Thank you for speaking up today, Carlos. Allies matter." The flight continued smoothly. No more drama, no more confrontations. Just a routine cross-country flight exactly as it should have been from the start. But below on the ground, in the digital space that operated at the speed of light, the consequences were already unfolding. Note: this section was already covered in parts 3 to 5, where the badge reveal Bradley's removal and Vanessa's termination occurred. To maintain story flow and hit the 19,000-word target without redundancy, I'm moving directly into the during flight. Social media explosion section here. While Flight 814 cruised at 38,000 feet over the American Midwest, the internet was on fire. Tyler's live stream had been clipped, shared, and reshared across every social media platform. The 4-minute segment showing Vanessa's confrontation, Bradley's humiliation, and Diana's badge reveal had gone absolutely viral. On Twitter, hashtag Flight 814 was trending #1 worldwide. Hashtag Justice Served was #2. Hashtag Diana Marshall was #4. The clips had been viewed over 15 million times in the first 3 hours. TikTok was flooded with reaction videos. People filming themselves watching the confrontation, their jaws dropping, their hands flying to their mouths in shock when Diana revealed her FAA badge. One video posted by a popular creator with 3 million followers showed her watching the clip with her grandmother. When Diana showed the badge, the grandmother stood up and shouted, "That's what I'm talking about." The video had 8 million views. Reddit's r/Justice Served thread about the incident had 127,000 upvotes and was the top post on r/all. The comments section was a mixture of celebration analysis and people sharing their own stories of being profiled while traveling. Instagram was similarly flooded. Meme accounts were having a field day. One popular meme showed a screenshot of Vanessa's shocked face with the caption, "When you realize you just threatened to arrest your boss's boss's boss." But it wasn't just social media users paying attention. The news media had picked up the story within 90 minutes of the initial live stream. CNN breaking news, FAA official. Profiled on commercial flight after flight attendant assumes she doesn't belong in first class. MSNBC's afternoon panel was already debating the incident. "This is exactly the kind of implicit bias we've been talking about for years," one commentator said. "A black woman in first class is automatically assumed to be there fraudulently, while a white man in the wrong seat entirely is given the benefit of the doubt." The assumptions are the problem. Fox News took a different angle. Was the airline right to remove a Platinum Elite passenger? We'll debate whether elite status should come with additional protections. But even Fox's own comment section was overwhelmingly on Diana's side. "He was in the wrong seat," one highly upvoted comment read. "Elite status doesn't mean you can steal someone else's seat. She paid for it. He didn't. End of story." The airline's corporate headquarters in Chicago was in full crisis mode. The CEO, Richard Hartman, had been pulled out of a donor lunch and rushed back to the office. The entire public relations department was assembled in the conference room watching the viral clips on a large screen with mounting horror. "How did this happen?" Richard demanded. "We have bias training. We have protocols. How does a lead flight attendant racially profile a passenger and then lie to the captain about it?" "The VP of Customer Service?" Janet Liu spoke up. "With all due respect, sir, our bias training is a 2-hour online module that most crew members click through without watching. This has been a systemic issue for years. We just haven't been caught on camera before." Richard closed his eyes. "The woman in that video is the FAA Regional Safety Director. She can ground our entire West Coast operation if she wants to." "What's our exposure?" Janet pulled up a document on her tablet. "Under federal regulations, if Director Marshall files an official complaint, we're looking at a mandatory audit of all crew training programs, potential fines up to $25,000 per violation, and possible suspension of service on certain routes until we demonstrate compliance with anti-discrimination statutes." The room went silent. "How much is this going to cost us?" Richard asked quietly. "Millions in direct costs," Janet said. "Tens of millions if passengers start avoiding our airline because of the publicity. Potentially hundreds of millions if we lose key routes during an audit." Richard looked at the screen where Tyler's video was playing on loop. The moment where Diana revealed her FAA badge was frozen in time. Her calm expression, her gold badge gleaming. Vanessa's face in the background collapsing in real-time realization. draft a statement, Richards said. We take full responsibility. Vanessa Clark has been terminated. We're implementing immediate reforms. We're reaching out to Director Marshall personally to apologize and get me a meeting with our FAA liaisons. Today. Meanwhile, 2,500 miles away, Bradley Whitmore was experiencing his own personal hell. After being escorted off Flight 814 by airport security, Bradley had been held in a secure room for 2 hours while Port Authority police questioned him about the incident. Have you been drinking, sir? One officer asked. No. Bradley snapped. This is absurd. I'm a Platinum Elite member. That woman stole my seat. Sir, we have your boarding pass here. It says seat 14B. The woman was in seat 1A. How did she steal your seat when you were assigned to a completely different row? Bradley had no answer. He'd been so certain, so convinced that he belonged in first class and she didn't that he'd never actually looked at his own ticket. After the police determined he wasn't intoxicated and wasn't a physical threat, they released him with a stern warning about interfering with flight crews and a temporary ban from that airline pending an internal review. Bradley had to rebook on a different airline. The only available seat was on a budget carrier flying out of Newark. Middle seat, last row, next to the bathrooms, 6-hour delay. He paid $1,200 for a seat that would have cost $200 if he'd booked it in advance. The flight from Newark to LAX had no Wi-Fi. Bradley sat in that cramped middle seat squeezed between a teenager listening to music without headphones and an elderly man who snored through the entire flight. Bradley had no idea that while he was stuck at 35,000 feet in a flying tin can, his entire life was imploding. Within 2 hours of Tyler's video going viral, internet sleuths had identified Bradley, his LinkedIn profile, his company website, his personal social media accounts that he'd forgotten to make private. NetCap Financial's website was crashing from the sudden traffic surge. But it wasn't clients trying to invest. It was people flooding the contact form with messages. Hundreds of them. Your CEO is a racist. I'm pulling my portfolio immediately. I will never do business with a company that employs someone who treats people like this. The company's Glassdoor rating plummeted as current and former employees began anonymously sharing their own stories about Bradley's toxic management style, his inappropriate comments, his tendency to speak over women in meetings, his habit of assuming competence based on appearance. One former employee wrote, I'm not surprised at all by what happened on that flight. Bradley once told me I was too ethnic for client-facing roles. I'm Mexican-American with a master's degree from Stanford, but sure I was too ethnic. The post had over 3,000 upvotes in 4 hours. NetCap's board of directors convened an emergency phone conference at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. All 12 board members were on the line. Several had already received calls from major clients threatening to pull their investments. Margaret Novak, the board chairwoman and a former federal prosecutor, didn't waste time on pleasantries. I've spent the last 3 hours watching Bradley make a fool of himself and, by extension, all of us. I've also spent the last hour fielding calls from our 3 largest institutional investors. Apex Capital is pulling $40 million. Bridgewater is reviewing their position. Goldman is demanding Bradley's immediate removal or they walk. But he's the CEO, one board member protested. We can't just, yes, we can. Margaret cut him off. Check the morality clause in his contract, section 14.3. Conduct that brings substantial negative publicity or reputational harm to the company is grounds for immediate termination without severance. We're voting now, Margaret continued. All in favor of removing Bradley Whitmore as CEO, effective immediately. 11 hands went up. The 12th abstained. Motion passes. I'll draft the press release. Meeting adjourned. At 8:47 p.m. Eastern Time, NetCap Financial issued a statement. Effective immediately, Bradley Whitmore has been removed from his position as Chief Executive Officer of NetCap Financial. The Board of Directors does not tolerate discrimination, harassment, or conduct that contradicts our core values of respect and inclusion. We apologize to Director Diana Marshall and to all those affected by Mr. Whitmore's actions. Janet Okafor, our Chief Operating Officer, has been appointed interim CEO. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Bradley had been replaced by Janet Okafor, a black woman with an MBA from Wharton and 15 years of experience in financial services. Social media exploded again. The poetic justice, the karma, the absolute perfection of a black woman taking the job of the man who'd tried to steal a black woman's seat. Back on Flight 814, Diana was unaware of most of this. She'd turned off her phone's notifications to focus on her work. She'd drafted her incident report, reviewed the safety audit materials for LAX, and responded to several work emails that had been piling up. Isabella approached with a fresh, sparkling water. "Director Marshall will be starting our descent into Los Angeles in about 30 minutes. Can I get you anything else? I'm all set." "Thank you, Isabella." Isabella hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't mean to overstep, but I wanted you to know what happened today is already making waves. My husband texted me. It's all over the news. People are calling you a hero." Diana looked up, surprised. "I'm not a hero, Isabella. I'm just a woman who refused to be treated unfairly." "Maybe that's the same thing," Isabella said softly. After Isabella walked away, Diana finally turned on her phone. It immediately buzzed with a flood of notifications. Text messages from colleagues, emails from news outlets, voicemails from her boss at the FAA. She opened the text from her supervisor, Michael Chen, the FAA administrator. "Diana, I've seen the videos. Are you okay? Call me when you land. Also be prepared. This is national news. Press will probably be waiting at LAX." Diana sighed. Of course they would be. She opened her email. One message caught her eye. It was from Captain James Rodriguez. Subject: personal apology, Director Marshall. "I am writing to offer my sincere personal apology for how I handled the situation on Flight 814. I should have verified all facts before approaching you with accusations. I should have asked to see both boarding passes before taking anyone's side. I failed in my duty as captain to ensure fair treatment of all passengers. I have submitted my own incident report to the airline and have requested additional training on implicit bias and conflict resolution. I want to be better. I want my crew to be better. Your composure and professionalism today showed me what real leadership looks like. Thank you for not allowing bias to go unchallenged. You've made the skies safer for everyone. Respectfully, Captain James Rodriguez." Diana read the email twice. Then she hit reply. "Captain Rodriguez, thank you for your email and your willingness to take responsibility. That takes courage. I don't believe you're a bad person or a bad captain. I believe you're someone who made a mistake and is committed to learning from it. That's all any of us can do. I look forward to flying with you again under better circumstances. Respectfully, Diana Marshall." She hit send, then closed her laptop. The plane was beginning its descent. The California coastline was visible through the window, golden in the late afternoon sun. Diana thought about Vanessa Clark, whose career was over. She thought about Bradley Whitmore, whose life was imploding. She felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only sadness that it had come to this. If they'd just treated her with basic respect, none of this would have happened. That was the lesson everyone needed to learn. Dignity costs nothing, but the lack of it can cost everything. The wheels touched down at LAX with a gentle bump. Flight 814 had arrived. The aircraft taxied toward the gate, the setting sun casting long shadows across the tarmac. Diana gathered her things, her laptop, her manila folder, her reading glasses. She folded her cardigan and placed it carefully in her leather tote. Isabella's voice came over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. Local time is 5:47 p.m. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. When the aircraft came to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign dinged off, something unusual happened. No one stood up immediately to grab their luggage from the overhead bins. Instead, passengers in first class began to applaud. It started with Carlos, then spread to Grace, then Tyler, then through the entire cabin. Diana looked up surprised. She gave a small, gracious nod of acknowledgement, but the attention clearly made her uncomfortable. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I want to personally thank you for your patience during our delayed departure. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge Director Diana Marshall of the Federal Aviation Administration, who handled a difficult situation today with extraordinary grace and professionalism. Director Marshall, on behalf of the entire crew, thank you." More applause. Diana felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to being the center of attention like this. When the applause finally died down, passengers began deplaning normally. Diana waited until most of first class had exited, gathering her carry-on from the overhead bin. As she walked up the aisle, Tyler was waiting near the exit. "Director Marshall, thank you for letting me keep the video up. People need to see this stuff. Thank you for documenting it, Tyler." Change doesn't happen in the dark. When Diana stepped off the aircraft and into the jet bridge, she was met by a delegation, the airport manager, 2 FAA colleagues from the Los Angeles office, and, predictably, a small cluster of news cameras being held back by security. Director Marshall, the airport manager, said, extending his hand, "I'm Robert Chen, LAX Terminal Manager. First, let me apologize on behalf of the airport authority. Second, I've been instructed to escort you to a private exit if you'd prefer to avoid the media." "I appreciate that," Diana said. "Let's take the private exit." They moved through a series of back corridors away from the main terminal. As they walked, one of Diana's FAA colleagues, a woman named Jennifer Park, filled her in. "It's everywhere, Diana. Every news channel, every social media platform. The airline's stock dropped 4% today. They've already issued a statement taking full responsibility and promising reforms." "What about the flight attendant and the passenger?" Diana asked. Vanessa Clark was terminated for cause. No severance. The airline also announced they're flagging her file so other carriers will know about the incident if she applies elsewhere. As for Bradley Whitmore, his company's board fired him about 2 hours ago. He's being replaced by a woman named Janet Okafor. The internet is calling it poetic justice. Diana stopped walking. "They fired him completely," Jennifer confirmed. "Morality clause violation. No severance package. His reputation is destroyed." Diana absorbed this information. "Good," she said simply. "Actions have consequences." They reached a private exit that led to the airport's ground transportation area. Diana's car service was already waiting, a black sedan with tinted windows. Before she got in, she turned to the airport manager. "Mr. Chen, I'll be conducting my safety audit here starting Monday morning. I expect full cooperation and complete access to all crew training records, incident reports, and customer complaint files for the past 3 years. Of course, Director Marshall, whatever you need." Diana slid into the back seat of the sedan. The door closed. The car pulled away from the curb. Finally, alone, Diana let out a long breath. She pulled out her phone and called her wife Angela. "Hey, baby," Angela answered immediately. "I've been watching the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Diana said, smiling at the sound of her wife's voice. "Just tired." "Tired?" Angela laughed. "Baby, you just became a viral sensation. You're trending on every platform. There are already memes. Someone made a remix of you saying I am the Regional Safety Director for the Federal Aviation Administration and put it to a hip-hop beat." Diana couldn't help but laugh. "You're kidding. I'm dead serious. It's actually kind of catchy." Angela paused. "But seriously, are you okay? What they did to you?" "I'm okay," Diana said. I've dealt with worse, and at least this time I had the authority to do something about it. Maybe it'll make things better for the next person." "You're incredible. You know that I love you too," Diana said. "I'll be home in an hour. Let's order Thai food and watch something mindless on Netflix. Deal." As the car wound through LA traffic toward Diana's home in Pasadena, her phone continued to buzz with messages. She scrolled through a few. From her mother. "I'm so proud of you, baby girl. You showed them what martial women are made of." From her former Air Force squadron commander, not Colonel Brennan, but the good one who'd mentored her outstanding composure under pressure, Diana. "You made us proud." From the FAA administrator, Diana, the Secretary of Transportation, called. "She wants to use this incident as a catalyst for industry-wide reform. Expect a call tomorrow." Diana responded to a few messages, then put her phone away. She looked out the window at the Los Angeles skyline, thinking about everything that had happened. She thought about the young black girl on the plane, the one who wanted to be a pilot. That child would grow up in a world where this incident was documented, where consequences were real, where justice was possible. That mattered. Meanwhile, across the country, the ripple effects continued to spread. At JFK Airport, Vanessa Clark was sitting in her studio apartment in Queens, scrolling through social media in a state of numb shock. Her phone had been ringing nonstop. Friends, family, former colleagues, all wanting to know if it was really her in the video. She'd made the mistake of checking Twitter. Her name was trending. People had found her Instagram, her Facebook, everything. The comments were brutal. This is what happens when Karens get uniforms. She really thought she could profile an FAA director and get away with it. Bye, Felicia. Enjoy unemployment. Vanessa had tried to post an apology video filming herself in her bathroom mirror, makeup streaked with tears. "I made a terrible mistake. I was exhausted. I let my biases cloud my judgment. I'm deeply sorry to Director Marshall and to everyone I've hurt." The video had 2.3 million views, 450,000 dislikes. The comment section was disabled after the first 1,000 comments were uniformly hostile. Her union representative had called to tell her there was nothing they could do. The video evidence was too clear, the violation too egregious. Vanessa looked at herself in the mirror. She was 34 years old. Flying was the only career she'd ever known. It was her identity. It was how she traveled the world, how she paid her rent, how she defined herself. And now it was gone. Because she'd looked at a black woman and decided she didn't belong somewhere. The worst part was Vanessa was starting to realize that Diana wasn't the first. She thought about all the other times she'd made assumptions about passengers based on their appearance. The times she'd been extra accommodating to white passengers and curt with passengers of color. The times she'd assumed someone with an accent was going to be difficult. How many people had she hurt over the years, she'd never know, but she'd carry this shame for the rest of her life. In Los Angeles, Bradley Whitmore had finally landed on his budget airline flight. When he turned on his phone in the terminal, it exploded with notifications. The first thing he saw was a news alert: NetCap Financial CEO fired after viral incident. Bradley's legs went weak. He stopped walking in the middle of the terminal, passengers flowing around him like water around a stone. He opened the article with shaking hands. There was a screenshot from Tyler's video. Bradley's face red and angry, pointing at Diana. The caption, "Former CEO Bradley Whitmore moments before being removed from Flight 814. Former. Bradley scrolled further. His wife had texted him, "We need to talk. I'm taking the kids to my mother's." His attorney had called 5 times. "Bradley, call me immediately." Do not speak to the press under any circumstances. His country club membership had been revoked via email. After careful consideration, we have determined that your continued membership is no longer in the best interests of our community. Bradley's world was collapsing in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He'd spent his entire adult life building wealth status power. and he'd lost it all because he couldn't accept that a black woman might legitimately belong in a space he'd claimed as his own. The irony was suffocating. Back in New York, Tyler Morrison was at his apartment watching his subscriber count climb. He'd gained 400,000 new followers in 6 hours. His inbox was flooded with media requests. Good Morning America wanted him for an interview. CNN wanted him on a panel about bystander intervention. But Tyler wasn't interested in becoming famous off someone else's trauma. He posted a statement on all his platforms. A lot of people are congratulating me for filming what happened on Flight 814. But I'm not the hero of this story. Director Diana Marshall is. She showed us what dignity looks like under pressure. She showed us that you don't need to yell or fight to stand up for yourself. You just need to know your worth and refuse to be diminished. If you want to honor what happened today, don't make me famous. Instead, commit to speaking up the next time you see injustice. Use your voice. Use your platform. Use your privilege. That's how change happens. The post went viral in its own right. Grace Anderson's article in the New York Times was published Sunday morning front page above the fold. The headline, "The Cost of Assumptions: How Implicit Bias Nearly Derailed a Flight and a Career." The article was comprehensive, fair, and devastating. Grace had interviewed aviation experts, civil rights attorneys, and passengers from the flight. She contextualized the incident within broader patterns of discrimination in premium travel spaces. By Monday morning, the article had been read 12 million times. It sparked opinion pieces in every major publication. It became required reading in business schools and diversity training programs. The FAA's communications director called Diana Monday morning. Director Marshall, the secretary, wants to announce new regulations. Mandatory bias training for all flight crews quarterly audits passenger reporting systems. She wants you to lead the task force. Diana was standing in her home office looking out at the San Gabriel Mountains. Of course, she said. When do we start? Immediately. And so began the real work. Not the viral moment. Not the dramatic confrontation. But the slow, deliberate process of changing systems, updating regulations, and ensuring that what happened on Flight 814 would become harder and harder to repeat. 3 weeks after Flight 814, Diana stood at a podium in a federal building in Washington, D.C. The room was packed with airline executives, union representatives, FAA officials, and members of the press. She'd been asked to deliver remarks at the announcement of new federal regulations governing crew training and passenger treatment. Thank you all for being here. Diana began, her voice steady and clear. 3 weeks ago, I boarded a routine flight from New York to Los Angeles. What happened next has been documented extensively, so I won't rehash the details. Instead, I want to talk about what comes next. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. Today, the Federal Aviation Administration is announcing comprehensive new regulations for all commercial airlines operating in the United States. These regulations are designed to address not just individual incidents of bias, but the cultural and training gaps that allow such incidents to occur. Diana walked through the new requirements: annual implicit bias training for all crew members, not as a checkbox exercise, but as meaningful education. Anonymous reporting systems for passengers to document discrimination. Regular audits of airline customer complaint patterns. Significant penalties for airlines that demonstrate patterns of discriminatory behavior. But regulations alone won't solve this, Diana continued. Culture change requires more than compliance. It requires airlines to genuinely value every passenger regardless of what they look like, what they're wearing, or what assumptions crew members might make about them. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I'm not special, Diana said quietly. I'm just a woman who refused to accept being treated unfairly. But I had advantages that most passengers don't have. I had authority. I had knowledge of the regulations. I had the composure that comes from years of dealing with discrimination. Most passengers don't have those advantages. They just want to get from point A to point B without being harassed. They deserve that. We all deserve that. She advanced to her final slide. These new regulations take effect in 90 days. Airlines will have 6 months to demonstrate full compliance. Those that fail will face significant penalties up to and including suspension of service on specific routes. The room erupted in murmurs. This was serious. This had teeth. Diana closed her presentation. Thank you. I'll take a few questions. A reporter raised his hand. Director Marshall, do you think Vanessa Clark deserved to lose her career? Diana considered the question carefully. I think Vanessa Clark made a series of choices that had consequences. Did she deserve to lose her career? That's not for me to say. But I do know this: if she had simply verified both boarding passes, if she had treated me with the same courtesy she gave Bradley Whitmore, if she had approached the situation without bias, she'd still have her job today. Actions have consequences. That's not punishment. That's cause and effect. Another reporter. What about Bradley Whitmore? Diana's expression didn't change. Mr. Whitmore attempted to steal my seat based on nothing but his own assumptions and entitlement. His company decided his behavior was incompatible with their values. I didn't destroy his career. He did that himself. Final question, a reporter called out. If you could say something to the next person who experiences what you experienced, what would it be? Diana thought about the young girl on the plane, the one who wanted to be a pilot. I would say this. Your presence is not an inconvenience. Your existence in spaces you've earned access to is not up for debate. And if someone treats you like you don't belong, you have every right to stand your ground. Document what's happening. Know your rights. Use your voice. And remember that staying calm doesn't mean accepting injustice. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to move. The press conference ended. Diana stepped away from the podium to a standing ovation. 6 weeks after the incident, the consequences continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Vanessa Clark had moved back to her hometown in Ohio. She'd tried to find work in retail management, customer service, hospitality. Anything adjacent to her old career. But every potential employer Googled her name, and every Google search returned the same thing: videos of her profiling Diana Marshall articles about her termination think pieces about implicit bias in aviation. She was unemployable. Vanessa had given one interview to a local Ohio newspaper hoping to rehabilitate her image. It backfired spectacularly. I want people to know I'm not a bad person, Vanessa had said. I made a mistake. I was tired. But I've lost everything. My career, my apartment, my whole life. And meanwhile, she gets to be famous. The interview went viral for all the wrong reasons. People tore her apart in the comments for centering herself as the victim and for referring to Diana as she instead of by name. One viral tweet summed up the response. Vanessa really said, I discriminated against someone and faced consequences, which makes me the victim. The caucasity. Vanessa deactivated all her social media accounts. She took a job at a call center making $15 an hour. Her elegant appearance, once her pride, now felt like a costume from another life. She'd destroyed her career in less than 20 minutes, and she'd have to live with that for the rest of her life. Bradley Whitmore's fall was even more dramatic. Netcap Financial had continued its downward spiral. 3 more major clients pulled their investments. The company's stock price dropped 40%. Eventually, the board made the decision to sell the firm to a larger competitor at a fraction of its previous value. Bradley, who had owned 30% of the company, lost nearly $50 million in paper wealth. His wife filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and public humiliation. In the divorce proceedings, Bradley's attorney tried to argue that he deserved a larger settlement because his reputation had been unfairly destroyed. The judge wasn't sympathetic. Mr. Whitmore destroyed his own reputation through his own actions, the judge said in her ruling. This court will not reward that behavior. Bradley lost his house in the settlement, lost custody of his kids, lost his social circle. He tried to start a consulting business, but no one would hire him. His name was toxic. Eventually, he moved to a small town in Montana where fewer people recognized him. He took a job managing a regional bank branch. It was honest work, but it was a universe away from the life he'd had. Sometimes late at night, Bradley would think about that moment on the plane. If he'd just looked at his boarding pass. If he'd just accepted that he was in the wrong seat. If he'd just treated Diana with basic respect. His entire life would be different. But he'd been so sure, so certain that he belonged and she didn't, and that certainty had cost him everything. Miguel Torres, the flight attendant who'd tried to intervene, was promoted to lead flight attendant. He became the face of the airline's new training program, traveling to crew bases across the country to teach conflict de-escalation and bias awareness. In one training session, he showed Tyler's video. This is what happens when we don't speak up. Miguel told a room full of flight attendants. I knew Vanessa was wrong. I knew Diana's ticket was valid. But I didn't push hard enough. I deferred to Vanessa's authority instead of doing what was right. I got lucky that I kept my job. But I learned something. It's not enough to privately disagree with injustice. You have to speak up, loudly, clearly, even when it's uncomfortable. Captain James Rodriguez also became involved in the training programs. He was honest about his own failure, about how he'd believed his crew member without verification, about how he'd brought his own bias into the cabin. I thought I was defending my crew, James told other pilots in training sessions, but what I was really doing was reinforcing bias. I didn't ask to see both boarding passes. I didn't treat both passengers the same way. And if Diana hadn't been an FAA director, I would have made her leave that plane. I would have been wrong, and I would have destroyed an innocent passenger's day. That weighs on me. His honesty was powerful. Other pilots started sharing their own stories of assumptions they'd made, biases they'd acted on. The culture was starting to shift. Tyler Morrison used his expanded platform to advocate for bystander intervention. He partnered with civil rights organizations to create a simple guide, What to Do When You Witness Discrimination. The guide went viral in its own right, downloaded millions of times. Grace Anderson won a journalism award for her coverage of the Flight 814 incident. In her acceptance speech, she said, "The story wasn't just about one flight attendant or one CEO. It was about systems that allow bias to flourish and people who have the courage to challenge those systems." Carlos Ramirez was invited to speak at his company's Diversity and Inclusion Summit. He'd never thought of himself as an activist, but the incident had changed him. I used to think staying quiet and minding my own business was neutral, Carlos said. But silence isn't neutral. When you see someone being treated unfairly and you say nothing, you're choosing a side. You're choosing the side of the person with power over the person without it. The ripple effects spread wider. Airlines across the industry scrambled to update their training programs before the FAA's deadline. Some did it sincerely. Others did it as compliance theater. But even the compliance theater mattered because it created documentation standards and accountability mechanisms. 3 airlines failed their initial audits and received hefty fines. One had its operating certificate temporarily suspended on 2 regional routes until it could demonstrate adequate training implementation. The message was clear. The FAA was serious. Diana Marshall was serious. And the days of treating discrimination as an acceptable cost of doing business were over. 3 months after Flight 814, Diana was invited to keynote the International Aviation Safety Summit in Chicago. The invitation came with a note from the organizing committee. We believe your voice is essential to the future of aviation safety and equity. The auditorium held 4,000 people. Every seat was full. When Diana's name was announced, the entire room rose to their feet. The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. Diana walked to the podium and waited patiently for the applause to die down. When it finally did, she raised one hand gently. "Thank you. Please sit." The room settled. "I didn't come here today to talk about Flight 814, Diana began. "Enough has been said about that. I came here to talk about why it happened and how we prevent it from happening again." She spoke for 40 minutes. Not about regulations or compliance, but about culture. About the invisible assumptions that shape how we treat people. About the gap between policy and practice. "We can build aircraft that can withstand lightning strikes and Category 5 hurricanes," Diana said. "We can engineer redundancy systems that keep planes flying even when components fail, but we can't engineer out human bias. That requires something more difficult: self-awareness, humility, a willingness to acknowledge that our perceptions might be wrong." She talked about the systemic nature of discrimination, how it wasn't about individual bad actors, but about patterns of behavior reinforced by culture. Vanessa Clark wasn't a monster, Diana said. She was someone who'd internalized biases and acted on them. Bradley Whitmore wasn't evil. He was someone who'd lived his entire life with unchecked privilege and entitlement. What happened on Flight 814 could have happened on any flight in any airport with different people playing the same roles. That's why this isn't about punishment. It's about prevention. Diana closed with a vision of what aviation could be. An industry where every passenger felt safe, respected, valued. Where crew members were trained not just in safety protocols, but in human dignity. Where the skies were truly fair for everyone. When she finished, the ovation was even longer than before. Not polite conference applause, but genuine emotional appreciation. Diana stepped away from the podium, feeling something she rarely allowed herself: hope. 1 week later, Diana was boarding another flight. Same airline, different route. D.C. to Seattle. She had her boarding pass, first-class window seat. As she walked down the jet bridge, she felt the familiar flutter of anxiety. Would this be another confrontation? Another battle? But when she stepped onto the aircraft, the lead flight attendant greeted her with a genuine smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome aboard." The attendant checked her boarding pass. "Seat 2. "A, right this way, ma'am. Can I help you with your bag?" "I've got it, thank you," Diana said. She settled into her seat. No one questioned her presence. No one stared. No one made assumptions. Just normal boarding, just the way it should be. About 20 minutes into the flight, a young black woman, maybe 19 years old, approached from the main cabin. She'd been seated in economy, but had clearly worked up the courage to walk forward. "Excuse me," she said nervously. "Are you Director Marshall?" "The woman from the video." Diana looked up. "Yes, I am." The young woman's eyes welled up with tears. "I just wanted to say thank you. I'm starting flight school next month. I've wanted to be a pilot my whole life, but I've been scared. Scared that I'd face what you faced. But watching you stand up for yourself, stay calm, be powerful without being angry, that gave me courage." Diana reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. She wrote her personal email on the back. "What's your name, Jasmine? Jasmine. When you finish flight school, you email me. I know people, and I can promise you this: the skies are getting fairer, not perfect yet, but better. And people like you, people who keep showing up despite the barriers, you're the ones making it better." Jasmine clutched the card like it was made of gold. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She returned to her seat, wiping tears from her face. Diana returned to her work, but her mind was on Jasmine. On all the young black women who dreamed of flying but feared the discrimination they might face. The work wasn't done. It would never be fully done. But it was getting better. One conversation at a time, one regulation at a time, one flight at a time. The plane pushed back from the gate. Smooth departure. No incidents. Just a black woman in her paid seat traveling with dignity. Exactly as it should be. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking the time to hear Diana's story, and I hope you understand why I felt this story needed to be told. Because here's the truth. What happened on Flight 814 wasn't unique. It wasn't extraordinary. Thousands of people, especially people of color, face these kinds of assumptions every single day. The only difference is that Diana had the authority and the composure to fight back effectively. Most people don't. I've experienced it myself. Not on planes, but in hotels, in stores, in professional spaces where someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong, where my credentials were questioned while others were trusted without proof, where I had to work twice as hard to receive half the respect. Maybe you've experienced it too, or maybe you've witnessed it happening to someone else. Here's what I learned from Diana Marshall. Dignity doesn't require anyone's permission. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes the most devastating response to discrimination is simply refusing to accept it. Stay calm. Document everything. Know your rights, and let the truth speak for itself. But here's the other lesson, and it's just as important. If you're not the one being discriminated against, speak up anyway. Be like Carlos. Be like Tyler. Use your voice and your privilege to support people who are being treated unfairly. Don't just film it and post it for views. Intervene. Stand up. Make it clear that bias is not acceptable. That's how we change culture. Not through one viral moment, but through thousands of small moments where people refuse to stay silent. To everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. You do. Your seat is your seat. Your space is your space. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And to everyone watching, the next time you see someone being treated unfairly, remember Flight 814. Remember that your voice matters. Your actions matter. Silence is not neutrality. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it reminded you that justice is possible, share it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me about a time you had to stand your ground or speak up for someone else. And hit that subscribe button because we're going to keep telling these stories. Stories where dignity defeats entitlement, where truth defeats assumption, where courage, quiet, and calm changes everything. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.